Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Bro Doc Talk, a YouTube series by two Black men designed to help people get into med school, residency, and beyond. My name is Henry Lewis III, and I am a former pre-health advisor and incoming residency program coordinator.
And hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Omar Young. I'm a maternal fetal medicine specialist and also an associate residency program director. This premiere episode is titled Preparing for the Match. We will provide you with the basic tools to prepare your application in order for you to find the best residency possible for you. There are links in the description below to many of the topics we discuss. So let's get started.
All right, Dr. Young. So you have tons of experience with this, preparing for the match, and just preparing for your career as a maternal fetal medicine specialist. And we know that there's so much that goes into that. So just to get us started, can you explain to the viewers, what is the match? What does that mean? We have viewers from all different backgrounds. So what does all that mean?
Yeah, so to someone in the outside world, it's really doesn't make any sense. And for a lot of us, until you actually do it, doesn't make any sense either. So the match is basically the process in which applicants to residency programs, as well as programs that are looking for new interns or residents, are matched together such that you create a class complement for your next academic year. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that rising fourth-year medical students initiate a process of getting together an application to specific programs in whatever specialty you're applying to, and getting your letters of recommendation, essays, transcripts, what have you, assembling all of that and submitting that to specific programs that you want to apply to. Mm-hmm. Conversely, those residency programs will then look at all of the applications and then decide who are the best candidates to interview, and then ultimately who they want to rank to come to their program.
Got it. It's a very complex system, is what it sounds like to me. So because it's so complex, and as I mentioned, I'm an incoming residency program coordinator, so I'm going to be learning a little bit more about this, but can you explain kind of the basic process of applying for it? Like, I know that there's the ERAS and the match. So what's the difference between the two, and what are the basic steps to getting to those two?
Right. So ERAS stands for Electronic Residency Application Service, and this is provided through the American Association of Medical Colleges, or the AAMC. This process starts in late May to early June of the year to which you're applying. And basically, it's a central database for all of your stuff. So you upload your demographics, your transcripts, you request your letters of recommendation through this. And this is the central application that goes to all the residency programs that you select that you want to apply to in whatever specialty that you're going into. Conversely, there's something called the National Residency Match Program, or the NRMP. The NRMP is the organization that puts together applicants with programs and programs with applicants, such that it creates a match between the two, and programs generate a incoming intern class. Both are separate things that you need to apply to throughout the process. And so I've had students that submit their ERAS just fine, but they forget to apply to the NRMP, which is a problem because you won't be able to participate in the match until you actually apply to the match.
Got it. So for all the viewers listening out there, this is a two-step process. So be sure to, really pay attention to all the steps that it takes.
One of the things I would recommend for everyone listening is create yourself either a Google document or some sort of spreadsheet that you can create timelines for yourself, so or a checklist that you've gotten a milestone done. Right. So for instance, the ERAS application opens this year, or opened around June 9th. Right. So you should start saying, oh, it's the 9th of June. Have I started working on my application? And programs will be able to start seeing those applications by the beginning to the middle of September. And so, if you want to be in the top of the pile when programs are looking at your application, you want to get that application in as early as possible so that you can maximize your chances of getting an interview to the program.
Got it.
Furthermore, you also want to make sure that you understand the timelines for the NRMP or the match. Registration for the NRMP starts on September 15th at noon Eastern Standard or Eastern Daylight Time. So you want to put that in your calendar. So if you just register for that and pay the fee, you don't have to worry about did I actually register for the match or not because you've done it already.
Right.
Um, and so making sure that you have a timeline for everything is going to be super important in order to accomplish.
So all of the dates and information that Dr. Young has just mentioned will be included in the description below for your reference.
Mhm.
So we'll go ahead and move on. So Dr. Young, even before we get to this process of applying for residency, medical school is all about exploring, all the options that medicine, has in store for you. So how can a medical student really make sure that they're exploring all the areas of medicine so that they can make the best informed decision about which residency to apply to?
Yeah. So I think answering this question, I can answer this from my own personal experience.
Mhm.
So I came into medical school thinking that I was going to be either a psychiatrist or a cardiologist. And I kept an open mind throughout my clinical training in medical school. And my first rotation during my third year of medical school was OBGYN, and I had no intention of going into OBGYN whatsoever. But I was fascinated by the field. I was fascinated by you're doing something different every day. You have lots of things that you don't know, and there are many questions that are needed to be answered. You're combining different surgical skills along with critical thinking needed from like an internal medicine standpoint. So having finished all of my clerkships, I always came back to the concept of, oh, I guess OBGYN is the field for me.
Right.
So what I would say to any student that I am advising is that keep an open mind throughout the entirety of your clinical training. And after the end of third year, sit down with yourself and make a pros and cons list of what do you want out of medicine, out of your career, and what do you not want. So for
Mhm.
me personally, I didn't want to work with patients who were older or patients who were under the age of 17. So that excluded geriatrics and pediatrics for me. But
Yeah.
I would say, do that list for yourself because you're going to be applying for a position that essentially will determine the rest of your career. So you want to be happy with the decisions that you make, and going with your passions is only going to reinforce that happiness.
Got it. So a follow-up to that, you got a question about applying to multiple different residencies. So, what if you're in your third and fourth year and you're like, well, I like this and I like that. I just can't decide. I think I want to apply to multiple residency programs. What is your opinion about that, especially, from the position that you're in medical education? What is your opinion about applying to multiple specialties?
Yeah, so some people will tell you that that's a bad idea
Okay.
because you're going to not only waste people's times in looking over your application, but also you're going to waste your money in applying to programs. And so, just for all people listening, you can apply up to 10 programs through the ERAS system for about $100. But more programs going up, there's a graduated system in how much it costs, and that link will be provided to you. Um, However, I think for a student that still hasn't made up his or her mind, I don't think it's a bad idea to apply to two different specialties as long as they make specialty sense. And what I mean by that is it doesn't make sense to me as a someone that advises medical students in addition to what I do with residents for a student to apply to a surgical specialty and also to psychiatry. That is,
Mm-hmm. Those are two very different.
they're very different fields. And so I always like to sit down with those students and say, okay, so tell me what made you want to go to medical school. Tell me what excited you to get out of bed in the morning during your clinical clerkships. And tell me what you can absolutely not deal with in medicine.
Mhm.
And when a student can answer those questions, 9 times out of 10, we can tailor or we can figure out exactly what that student wants to do with his or her career.
Mhm.
Um, but I would say in my experience with students that apply to different specialties, it's not a bad idea as long as you have a strategy.
Right.
Meaning that I'm going to apply to not every single program in those two specialties, but to specific programs. And I'm going to use the beginning of my 4th year to further figure out exactly where my future is.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. So, I mean, it seems like this requires some really deep self-reflection as well as maybe some consultation with, an advisor in medical school and things like that.
Exactly. I think for us as advisors, I don't think that we should be shutting students down per se
Mhm.
and, poo-pooing their ideas of what they want to do with their career. I think everything is not as conventional as we like it to be.
Mhm.
And so if a student, for instance, if a student is a non-traditional student, or if a student is on a career path that may take them like an extra year of medical school to complete their whole training, that's fine as long as they're able to assemble the best application package possible in order to achieve their goal.
Got it. Okay. So, with all of that, what would you say is kind of an estimation on how many residency programs an applicant should apply for? You mentioned like you can apply up to 10 for 100, but in general, what's a good number?
So that has been a really hot topic
Mhm.
in undergraduate medical education the last few years. There's emerging data from the AAMC looking at as you apply to more and more residency programs, there's actually diminishing returns because you're going to be excluding your fellow applicants who in years past would otherwise be able to get interviews at the top programs. And so for me as an associate program director, when I'm looking at applications, I have to I have to look at literally hundreds of applications over the course of a cycle. And you guys that are applying to medical school these days are fantastic and brilliant. And so because the MCAT is moving to a pass fail strategy, I have to use some sort of rubric. Sorry,
Is it
that
the USMLE,
it's the what's it called? What did I mean? Not MCAT.
the
What's it called?
USMLE?
Step one, yeah.
Oh, step
So
one. Got
yeah, so step one is moving to a pass-fail strategy. We as program directors, we have to use some sort of metric in order to say, hey, does this application warrant an interview, warrant being on the waiting list, or do we not want to consider them for an interview?
it. Mhm.
And so um, there is depending on the data for your individual, especially to which you're applying, there is a certain point at which you saturate your ability to get interviews. And so I would encourage all applicants in whatever specialty you're looking at, so like OBGYN or pediatrics or radonc or pathology or whatever you're applying into, go to the AAMC website and look at exactly what has happened over the last 5 years in your specialty. And one of the things that you can plug into this interactive website is your step one score previously, your med school GPA, if you and what grades you've gotten in your clinical clerkships, and seeing exactly how that correlates with the amount of interviews that those applicants like you have gotten in recent years. I will tell you that um, A good sweet spot for applying to programs usually is between 12 and 15. Going over that really depends on what your application looks like. And so when I talk to an applicant in advising role,
Mhm.
I want them to generate a list of programs into three specific categories. Those categories should be your reach programs, meaning that those are aspirational. You would love to go to those programs, but they have cream of the crop, tip top numbers that are that may not be where you are, but you could possibly get an interview there. You want to have a list of programs that are within reach. So those programs that align with your numbers and where you want to be geographically. And then you have your safeties, which I submit my application there. I know I'm going to get an interview there. And when you do assemble a list like that, be cognizant of where you want to live because despite you being in the hospital for thousands of hours over the course of the next 3 to sometimes 7 years, you want to
Mhm.
make sure that you're living in a place that, is a good place to live for you outside of the
Agree.
hospital or clinic.
Right.
So, what I did when I was applying, I literally took out a map of the US and I said, where do I want to live? Or
Right.
where do I see myself, having a life outside of the hospital. And so that's what I did when I was in your shoes.
Mhm.
Um, and so the other thing that I would say also is when you generate your list, go to those programs' individual websites and look at what they are looking for in an applicant
Right.
and what are they looking for numbers wise.
Right.
With this being the age of COVID and everything being virtual, and this being in the 21st century, everything is online, and like that's a great resource that we applicants sometimes forget.
Right.
So use that as your resource because sometimes an applicant asks me a question in an interview, I'll say, "Oh, that's on the website. Did you read the website?"
Right. 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 Reading is fundamental, right?
It is.
And a lot of what you mentioned, in my former career as a pre-health advisor, we told pre-med students going in trying to get into medical school a lot of these same things. So, it's really utilizing what many advisors have told you over the last several years about this journey to medicine. All of that together is really what you should be putting together as you make your decisions about applying to residency.
Absolutely, absolutely, because you don't want to go through this process for a second or third time.
Right.
So you want to make your application as strong as possible, and you want to be able to apply to programs that are going to give you the interview because getting the
Right.
interview is half the battle.
Right.
And you want to you want to create a strategy that is going to be able to maximize your chances to match at whatever program you want to match at.
Got it. Got it. Thank you for that information. So, kind of going a little deeper into, you talked a little bit about, what programs are looking for. So, kind of want to dive deeper into a little bit of the process. Letters of recommendation. We know how important that is, in multiple different industries, but especially medicine. Can you talk a little bit more about, what residency programs are looking for in letters of recommendation and we learned that there is a standard letter of evaluation that some residency programs are using. Can you maybe explain the difference and kind of what's going on with that?
For me, as a residency program director, I look at letters of recommendation as have your faculty or whoever you worked with, do they endorse you to be an intern
Mhm.
in
Right.
whatever specialty you're applying to? Um, and so I tell all applicants ask people that you feel will advocate for you to the best of their abilities in your
Mhm.
application.
Mhm.
Never want someone to submit a letter of recommendation that is lukewarm or tepid because we as readers of those letters in the application will sift between the lines.
Right.
So in for those that may be watching that actually write letters of recommendation, you know full well that there are certain types of language that is used in those letters of recommendation,
Absolutely.
different types of adjectives that don't necessarily want to disparage a candidate, but don't necessarily want to endorse that candidate. And
Right.
so program directors can read between the lines. So when you come to the point at which you need your letters of recommendation, or it's called LORs, you want to assemble what I call like a mini portfolio. So assemble for the letter writer your personal statement. Make sure that personal statement is without any grammatical errors.
Right.
You want to give them a copy of your CV or resume. And I would actually ask them in person. I think it's like a good personal touch. And be honest with them. Say, or ask them, can you, in all faith and honesty, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? If that person says no, that's great because you avoided a
Right.
scenario in which you get a very weak letter recommendation that actually could hurt your application.
And I kind of want to emphasize that as well, because that's something we often told pre-med students applying to residency, applying to medical school is specifically ask your recommenders, can you write a strong letter of recommendation? Because, I've seen letters where, there were 3 or 4 sentences and, it was very generic. It didn't really tell me that the applicant knew the professor very well. They might have sat in the front of the class and got an A or something like that. So if if your recommenders are really telling you that they can't write a strong letter, that's a good sign that it's time to find someone else.
Right. And, it doesn't have to necessarily be someone that you've immediately worked with. If you've worked with someone for like 2 weeks and they love you and you have a great personal relationship with them,
Mm-hmm.
that's great. And furthermore, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone in your specialty. Now, yes, I want to see at least a couple of letters from your specialty that, says that you're going to be a qualified person to be one of my interns.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. But for me personally, if I see a letter of recommendation from someone outside of your specialty that is just stellar, then that tells me that you're actually a very well-rounded person. And for me, that I want people that are able to go between different parts of whatever specialty we're in, so that you can be the best doctor for our patients.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank
Now,
you.
you asked me about the standardized letter of evaluation.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so that is a new initiative that has happened in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So standardized letter evaluation, or you might hear it as the SLOE, SLOE, is a way to have residency applicants evaluated or recommended in a standardized fashion. And so, like I said, standard letters of recommendation will talk about glowing things about an applicant, and that's great. But the SLOE is a way that residency programs can evaluate applicants in a more standardized fashion, particularly as step one moves to a pass fail regimen and more medical schools are using pass fail for their clerkship evaluations.
Got it.
The SLOE is usually a 2 to 3 page document that looks at various competencies, depending on what specialty you're applying to, that say, is this person ready to be an intern? Which I don't expect many applicants to be ready to be interns, because if they are, then they don't need to do an intern year. But it's a way to say, hey, has this person attained the basic knowledge of X, Y, and Z throughout medical school that is ready to propel them to then be trained as an intern in whatever specialty they're applying to. The SLOE is going to replace one letter of recommendation in the application. So, for instance, this is a trial year in OBGYN. And so applicants can use the SLOE in lieu of one of their letters of recommendation, but it is not required.
Got it.
From an OB perspective, we'll be seeing how this goes over the next year, and then national guidelines will then determine if this was successful or not and dictate what happens. Other specialties like internal medicine and
Mhm.
emergency medicine are already using the slow,
Okay.
and fellowships like GYN oncology have been using the slow as well, and with good return.
Mhm.
So I think this is the wave of the future. And it actually is not meant to hurt applicants. It's actually meant to help you
Right.
so that we can be more objective in who we're having to come to interview and to then rank.
Yeah. And making sure that what it seems like to me is making sure that the residency programs know that you have fulfilled specific, skills or competencies that they're looking for
Exactly,
for
exactly.
physicians, versus a letter that's saying stuff that may not have anything to do with your ability to be a good resident in their program.
Right.
Mm.
Um, you might want to put like an overlay of a sample slow
Mhm.
while I'm talking,
Okay.
so that people can know what the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is recorded, so I'll remember that for when I'm editing out. So awesome. Okay, so let's see. Okay, the interview type stuff. All right. So Dr. Young, we've talked about, we started talking about the process of applying. So with the letters of recommendation, interviewing, that's a whole, experience in itself. Can you talk a little bit more about what applicants should expect for the interview as it relates to attire, maybe types of questions, if it's like behavioral, or what's your take on preparing for that interview process?
Yeah. So, you know, doesn't really matter that this is the age of COVID where most interviews are done virtually. You still need to adhere to basic interview etiquette. And so, in order to help you, sorry, in order for any applicant to fully prepare for the interview process, strongly recommend that you do practice or mock interviews at your home institution. And
Mhm.
so, sitting down with either the clerkship director or the residency director or someone that you find that you trust or even find intimidating that can ask you specific interview questions or sample ones that can be found online um, can get you to start talking and to be able to articulate just why you applied to whatever specialty and why you want to be at whatever program. Um, Going with attire, even when you're at home or in an office on Zoom doing an interview, you want to be dressed appropriately. So I happen to be wearing scrubs today just because I'm in the middle of cases and doing work, but we should be wearing, standard business attire. Your for your clothing is your first impression. And so for men watching this program, you want to have like a nice jacket, a nice cleaned iron shirt, and a tie. And for ladies, having a jacket, a nice blouse is totally reasonable. Medicine continues to be a rather conservative culture, and so making sure that you're not too flashy with any piercings, weird color schemes,
Like
or
tattoos. What do
tattoo,
you?
or showing off things that you wouldn't want your mother to see.
Got it.
Um, because you're going to do this virtually, make sure that you're in an environment in which things that you don't want be seen are not seen. So clean up your space. So I don't necessarily want to see your record collection or any other things that you don't necessarily want your interviewers to see, because guess what? If I see that, that might be a question that I can ask you in your interview, and you might not be prepared for that.
Right.
So being in an environment that's not just that's comfortable for you, but
Mhm.
also that's professional.
Would you recommend a virtual background?
I think
Or
a virtual background is totally reasonable.
yeah,
And I actually like virtual backgrounds, and
yeah,
so if you choose one that's interesting, I'm going to ask you about that, and that's a great jumping off point
right.
in conversation. And honestly, the best interviews, I actually don't talk about medicine or anything at all. It's basically I want to know that you're, someone that I can work with in the middle of the night.
A good fit. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Although I will say I really, really don't like when people say, is this person a good fit?
Okay.
Because that to me implies that, this is some sort of a club that someone's applying to.
Mm-hmm.
So I honestly think a applicant should look at, is this program right for them?
Right.
And is this applicant going to be able to excel
Mm-hmm.
in our program?
Got it.
Um, so I think just changing the language that we use is super important
Yeah.
because it's about um, programs giving education to applicants, but also applicants being able to go somewhere where they can maximize their potential.
Right. Right. So kind of going back to, you talking about what's discussed in interview, you said some of your, best interviews, you all weren't even talking about medicine. So is that kind of standard across the board with residency interviews, or do you have
Yeah.
any examples of
So,
kind of general
yeah,
questions?
so it's becoming more standard in
Okay.
medical interviews.
Okay.
A lot of the data looking at interviewing, specifically behavioral interviewing, comes
Okay.
from the corporate world.
Hmm.
So for those of you that may not be aware, behavioral interviewing is a mechanism in which certain types of questions are answered, such that the questioner gauges whether or not this person is altruistic or arrogant or has a potential not to work well with others or is not a team
Hmm.
player, so on and so forth.
Right.
I strongly encourage all applicants to just Google behavioral interviewing questions and see exactly what is being asked in interviews these days and ask yourself, how would you answer those questions? Because I guarantee you're going to be asked those questions in interviews coming up.
Hmm.
Um, some samples of behavioral interviewing questions are, um, you know, if you were given $1 million, what would you do with that and why? Another good example of a behavioral interview question is, tell me what is your greatest weakness and how did you overcome it?
Hmm.
Applicants don't really want to talk about their weaknesses, but that's actually a good chance for me as the question asker, to say, how is this applicant going to approach adversity? And how did this applicant overcome adversity?
Right. Right.
Um, so the interview process is, yes, it's for you to learn about the program, learn what you're going to be doing rotation wise, things like that. But it's also for me as a program director to see, are you someone that is going to be competent, is
Hmm.
going to be working well with others, and someone that's teachable?
Right.
So the interview is two pronged from that perspective.
Right. Got it. So one of the things I thought about as you were speaking was, and this is something that, we would tell pre-med students when they were going for their medical school interviews, is to make sure they reread their personal statement so
Yeah.
that they actually remember what it is that they told the
Yeah.
program, that, why they were trying to, enter that program. So would you recommend medical students do the same thing? And also, what in general are you all looking for in personal statements?
Yeah. Um, Please, applicants, keep your personal statements brief, because I have to read hundreds of these every year. And honestly, they start out and end the same way, with a little story. And then at the end, it's like, and this is why I want to be the best.
At the very end.
Um, Personal statement is called a personal statement because it has to be personal. It has to be your story. The personal statement tells me something that your application doesn't tell me. So, in your personal statement, you don't need to rehash your volunteer experiences, your grades that you've gotten in certain clerkships or things like that. Tell me something that I'm not going to be able to garner just from looking at your ERAS.
Mhm.
Those make the best personal statements. So, I two personal statements that I've read in the past come to mind. One is, a young lady talked about her growing up in a foreign country and immigrating to the United States and trying to understand exactly where she fit in American culture and how that can be applied to how she wants to be.
Mhm.
That's great. And we spent the entire interview talking about um, healthcare disparities and immigration policy and things like that. Another applicant personal statement that I'm reminded of is when he told me about how he had to have surgery as a medical student and his perspective on becoming the patient when he was
Mhm.
supposed to be learning how to be treating patients.
Mm.
And so I think those two things give depth to your application, give meaning to the interview experience, and then it sticks in the back of my mind as saying, oh, this is a very interesting person that
Mhm.
I would love to potentially rank for my residency class.
Absolutely, yeah. It seems like it gives you much more about the true person and who they are as a human being,
Absolutely.
than
And
simply, yeah, I wouldn't volunteer like you said earlier.
right.
That's what everyone does.
And then I would say, the personal statement also is a great opportunity for you to explain things that,
Mhm.
otherwise, the application may make you look a certain type of way, but the personal statement, flips things on its head. So, I've had students apply that, have to list that they had a DUI in the past,
Mhm.
but the personal statement says, oh, did you learn from that? What were the consequences of that? Things like that. Um, with respect to the personal statement, please, please, please write it on time so that it's not the one thing that's holding up your application. Like I said, you can start submitting ERAS in early September, typically around the 1st of September is when the
Mhm.
application starts opening, and the timeline when you can start submitting the application opens. And
Mhm.
programs can start looking at those applications this year starting around September 29th. And so
Okay.
that's like a 2.5, 3 week turnaround. So you want to make sure that your personal statement's done and your application submitted as soon as possible.
Right.
That being said, don't rush your personal statement, because if I see a personal statement that's full of grammatical errors, syntactical errors, that's not a good first impression
Yeah.
for someone. So just like when you're on Zoom or in person with interviews, your personal statement is the first impression of this person. And so if I see a personal statement that is full of misspellings or grammatical errors and things like that, that may tell me, hey, this person might not be the most organized or most on top of things.
Mhm.
And I might want to reconsider giving that applicant an interview. So get like 2 or 3 people to read your personal statement, because once you've written your personal statement, your blinders are up and you're gonna not see things that others would see in your application.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, it also shows, detailed orientedness, and you're going to be a physician. Being detailed oriented is very important. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
I would completely agree with that. So my last question, Dr. Young, is, so you talked a lot about the timeline as it relates to the match. And I'm sure most of our viewers know that, they match in March. Now what happens if, it's that week and you find out that unfortunately you did not match? What are some other opportunities that you can take advantage of to ensure maybe that you can match later on or match in another year? What happens to the applicant who does not match? What should they be doing next?
So the match is not just one specific day in March.
Okay.
It's now a match week. So for applicants applying this year, match week starts on March 14th of 2022 with official match day on March 18th of 2022. So what will happen on March 14th is that every single applicant that has applied to the match will find out if they've matched to a program. On March 18th, you will find out where you matched. Okay. So for those applicants that don't match to a program, they are eligible to apply to something called the SOAP, or SOAP, which is something that used to be called the Scramble, but now it's called the SOAP. Basically, for all unmatched candidates and for all programs that went unmatched, candidates will be able to see what spots are available that went unmatched for that cycle, and they will then be able to submit their applications and essentially reapply to those programs that week,
Okay.
such that they can then match into a spot on match day. Does that make sense?
Yes. Got
Okay.
it.
And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but the SOAP stands for Supplemental Offer and Acceptance Program, which is the program that happens during match week for those applicants that initially went unmatched. For more information on the SOAP, we're going to have a whole episode on exactly what happens with the SOAP and for what happens if you happen to go unmatched. So for applicants that have had that experience, please look forward to a new episode. And we'll try to help you through that and get you the guidance that you need.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Young, any final last, words of encouragement as students prepare for the match?
Yeah, so I think this is an exciting time for all medical students because this is exactly what you've been working for the last few years of your life.
Mhm.
And this is the chance to say, hey, I'm going to go into a field that I was meant to go into and that I can make the most meaningful impact. And so there's a lot of work involved in this process, as you can see, from the application process to the match process and how to navigate those two waters. But I think it's totally worth it.
Yeah.
For me, in my experience, I'm very thankful that I went through this process because I'm able to be in a career that I'm able to make the most impact, not just for my community, but for myself. And so I think having that opportunity is a privilege. Just like Billie Jean King once said, pressure is a privilege. And so not many people are able to go to medical school. And so you guys have gotten into medical school, and that should be celebrated. And now you have the pressure of getting into a residency program of your choice, and that should be celebrated.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all very much for tuning in to our first premiere episode of Bro Doc Talk. There's much more to come, so stay tuned. And if you have any ideas for future episodes, please let us know. We'll provide the information at the end of the video. All right. Thank you. Bye bye.